So, how does a displaced community do more than just survive? How do they actually plan a return? Today, we're going to dive into a pretty powerful blueprint for exactly that, drawn from chapter 14 of Teku's The Uprooted Chinar. And this is really a story not just about the past, but about using that past to build a real path forward. You know, the title of the book itself is such a powerful metaphor. The chinar tree, it's a symbol of Kashmir, right? So the idea of it being uprooted, well, that immediately sets the stage. It speaks to displacement, to resilience, and it's almost like an urgent warning. You've got to listen to the whispers of history before they're gone for good. So, the blueprint that's laid out in this chapter, it follows a really clear path. We start with lessons from the past, then we move through 4 key strategic pillars for right now, and it all leads up to this powerful vision for the future. Let's walk through it. Okay, so the first big idea here is that the community's long history isn't just a bunch of old stories. No, it's a source of deep, actionable lessons for survival and, this is the important part, for renewal. And this right here gets to the absolute heart of it. It's not about looking back just for the sake of it. It's about building a future. And the plan calls for this really delicate balance. On one hand, you have to foster mutual acceptance. But on the other, you have to be super vigilant in preserving that unique identity that your ancestors fought so hard to keep alive. But here's the thing. That history, it's not some simple, straightforward story. The chapter argues that to really get the community's perspective, you have to understand this central conflict, this deep tension between a beautiful ideal and a pretty harsh reality. Yeah, this slide just lays out that duality perfectly. On the left, you see this rich history of what the chapter calls true kinship. We're talking shared festivals, deep intellectual dialogues. But then you look to the right, and there's the harsh reality of intolerance, of forced conversions, of destruction. The blueprint basically argues that if you ignore either side of this coin, you're making a huge mistake. And this all leads to a really tough but totally essential lesson from the chapter. While harmony is the dream, history shows you just can't take it for granted. And this reality demands what the text calls intellectual vigilance, this constant awareness and readiness to protect your heritage. Okay, so that need for vigilance, that brings us to the very first pillar of this blueprint. Because when a community is facing the threat of being erased, the active preservation of its culture and faith, well, it's not just important anymore. It becomes a mandate for survival. And the commitment to this stewardship is just incredible. I mean, it spans centuries and technologies, from hiding sacred texts in caves way back when to today, building digital archives. It's this continuous, multi-generational promise to keep that cultural flame burning no matter what. But look, preserving a culture from the inside, that's really only half the battle. The next pillar suggests this fascinating strategic shift, moving from just surviving to actively shaping the public narrative and defending the community's story on a much bigger stage. The chapter points to something it calls the representation gap. The idea is that focusing on practical careers, like medicine and engineering, was a totally necessary survival strategy in exile. But it left this vacuum in the fields that actually control the story, fields like law, media, and public service. And this chart, wow, it just makes the problem so clear, doesn't it? The argument here is really profound. To fix false narratives and to truly fight for justice, a community has to consciously guide its next generation to close this gap and step into these crucial story-shaping fields. Right, but to advocate effectively to the outside world, you first have to have a cohesive voice on the inside. And that brings us to the next pillar, which looks inward to tackle fragmentation and build real unity. This quote from the chapter, man, it just nails the shift in mindset. It's a call to evolve from this passive position of just asking for acceptance to a much more proactive one, becoming confident proponents of the community's core values out on the world stage. And this isn't just wishful thinking. The book lays out these really clear, actionable steps to get there. It's a plan. Building alliances, leading dialogues, creating educational programs, these are the concrete ways you forge that strong, unified global voice. All right, so this is where everything we've talked about, the historical awareness, the cultural stewardship, the advocacy, the unity, it all comes together. It all converges into one single, powerful, final vision. So here it is, the whole thing in a nutshell. This is the 4-part plan for resilience.
It's this holistic approach that tries to balance outreach with self-preservation, creating what the text calls a distinct identity inside a broader solidarity, all of it laying the groundwork for a potential return. And in the end, the chapter leaves us with this really profound question. It frames the idea of return as not just a physical journey, but as a spiritual and a psychological one. And it kind of makes you wonder, what does it truly take for any displaced people to reclaim not just a piece of land, but their very soul?
And so we end right back where we started, with the image of the Chinar. It's a symbol of roots, of resilience, and of a future that this blueprint passionately argues is still very much possible.